So whenever you are ready, I think we can go and start.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is GIZMO Math Boy, and this is using RPGs to fuel my coding habit. Thank you, Gary, for creating a game many of us still like to play today, and here's to celebrating a life well played. Role-playing games consist of players playing some role in a fictional setting. These players interact in a setting, their choices change and affect that setting. There's one person that creates or manages this setting for players, the Dungeon Master or DM, sometimes referred to generically as Game Master or GM. This talk is focusing on tabletop role-playing games. These are primarily played with pencil and paper and a variety of polyhedral dice. There are different genres of role-playing games, mostly having to do with setting, which influences the roles the players play. There's cyberpunk like Shadowrun, far future science fiction like Star Frontiers, even post-nuclear war, post-apocalyptic games like YAML World. Then there's the one foundational to them all, Dungeons & Dragons, which is swords and sorcery. I mostly play Hyperborea, which is derived and related to D&D, and most of my programs are written for it. The players interact with the setting through encounters. This can involve combat. Sometimes it's solving a puzzle to get some treasure.
Gizmo, sorry to interrupt. We are still viewing your slide number 1. I don't know if it's normal or not.
Oh, it's not showing over there? Let's go back to slide number 1. It says my screen share.
Maybe unshare and reshare. Let's try that.
Or resume share? How's that?
I still view slide number 1. Oh, okay, slide number 2 now. Yeah, that's good. We can see that moving.
Thanks, Nicholas. That's all right. So start over from the beginning. So using RPGs to fuel my code habit. I'm GIZMO Math Boy, and here we go again. Thank you, Gary, for creating a game many of us still like to play today. Here's to celebrating a life well played. Role-playing games consist of players playing some role in a fictional setting. These players interact in the setting. Their choices change and affect the setting. There's one person that creates or manages the setting for the players, the Dungeon Master or DM, sometimes referred to generically as Game Master or GM. This talk is focusing on tabletop role-playing games. These are primarily played with pencil and paper and a variety of polyhedral dice. There are different genres of role-playing games, mostly having to do with setting, which influences the roles the players play. There's cyberpunk like Shadowrun, far future science fiction like Star Frontiers, even post-nuclear war, post-apocalyptic games like YAML World. Then there's the foundational one to them all, Dungeons & Dragons, swords and sorcery. I mostly play Hyperborea, which is derived and related to D&D, and most of my programs are written for it. The players interact with the setting through encounters. This can involve combat. Sometimes it's solving a puzzle to get some treasure. These encounters can take place in a dungeon under a haunted keep or in an old and despotic city ruled by a cabal of wizards. So that's a very quick intro into the world of RPGs. So let's dive into this hobby that fuels my coding habit. As a DM, there are many tables to use. One such table is for treasure a monster might have. Let's look at the A class of treasure. It hits all the kinds of treasure possible. The coins are readily handled and understood. Gems, jewelry, and magic have their own sets of tables beyond this one. Here's a snippet of the gems table. Even on that table, there's more rolling that could be required. Jewelry has a couple subsets of tables. There's the types of jewelry. And then there's the value and composition jewelry, which has even more rolling on it. Magic also has a few subtables, as mentioned before. Eventually, you get to the far end of this tree of tables. Then you start back at the beginning of this table that you started things on, and you roll more. So I was looking for a way to automate all of this. Rick Cygnus created Roland to automate things for him. It also helps a bit with the organization and creation of tables. So far, it's only on GitHub. So with some tables and a little bit of code, you can determine what loot that group of bandits has. This is the program, minus the usual boilerplate associated with Perl programs. It has a naive assumption of the input. Then you parse the input, do some roll on tables based on that, and then you get your final result. So let's look at the tables Roland uses. It's basically YAML files. In this instance, in a file like this, it's just a list, and it performs an action on each item on this list. In this case, the action is to load another file and act on what is inside that new file. This is the copper piece table. You can define the dice to use. In this case, it's a percentile or D100. It reflects the 25% chance of getting some kind of loot that's copper. If the result is 1 through 25, then you roll again as the result. And that helps determine the amount of loot you have. Otherwise, there's nothing to do. Then Roland finishes this file, and then it goes to the next file or action in the stack of actions it has to do. Here's a snippet of the gems table. It shows some modifications I made to the Roland code so we can have these embedded roles in the results. The double square brackets are used to delimit that action. It creates it's a quick hack, which I haven't had much polish on or put a pull request into Rick for it, but it works for me. We do something similar for jewelry. 2 files to work on, 1 type for the types to get your results, and another to get its value and composition. The nice thing about Roland is that you can also directly roll on any tables that you have created. In this case, I can roll directly against the gems or jewelry table if an encounter happens and you decide you want some gems or jewels. So once I got all this bit of drudgery taken care of, I need to work on the encounters that generate the need to determine the treasure found. Specifically, I automated the encounter tables another player of Hyperborea created and offered to the community. It's just a PDF file, but lots of tables, and it has a little bit more logic required to work to automate. The process to generate an encounter is to first know the location. Then an encounter type is rolled against that location. In this case, like it's an alien encounter type, animal or natural, even something specific like geyser or a bunch of berserkers. The encounter types are associated with a terrain type. So let's determine an encounter type for the Alice Mercury location. We could look at the map of Hyperborea to kind of see what possible terrain types there are. There's hills, ocean, coastal, and that's a mountain or something. We can then consult the gazetteer for the game to get more details. In this case, we found out it's not just a mountain, it's an extinct volcano. So we have a volcanic terrain in there as well. So each terrain type has subtables for the encounter type given. Here are 3 of the encounter types for the volcanic terrain type. Let's say we roll on the natural table and get a fever. Here is the table entry for fever. It gives some details what happens, if it affects a character, how long it might affect a character, and any other notes to do, and maybe any other rolling to do. Here's how the location table looks like as Roland. Next, there's an example of the volcanic terrain for a natural encounter type. So like I say, this is just converting tables in PDF files into YAML for Roland to consume. And for the fever result, the actions it does, it just returns the text in the file. So how to make this all automated? My first sketches of trying to solve this problem were basically lots of nested ifs. And to me, and from my limited developer and program experience, that kind of indicates one form of programming needs, something I've been meaning to figure out. A dispatch table. This was finally enough incentive for me to understand how to code them and use them. And now dispatch tables are fun to me and probably the limit of my cleverness that I can still debug. So, and here's the dispatch table I created to handle random encounters. Most of the entries here are stubs for ideas I haven't fully fleshed out yet, but the playing, role, and subtable entries do most of the work for what I need. So elsewhere in the program, I get results for the location and terrain type and pass it to this process results subroutine. It then iterates the results given to it with some regular expressions And those regular expressions are associated with some tokens that are basically entries in the dispatch table. So I get a regex hit and then process accordingly to the dispatch table and gives the final processed result. Here's a snippet of the YAML file that holds the regexes and their associated tokens. So now I have a program to automate the encounters I roll. And since Ben gave that PDF to the community, I was wondering how I could best share my program with them too. And I was thinking I didn't want to require them to know how to install, load Perl, or program Perl. And I decided to make a web app. And I chose Mojo because I hadn't really written anything for a modern web framework. And, and it gave me an excuse to learn how to code Mojo. Here's a small portion of the starting page of that Mojo Lite app. The hardest part for me as a sysadmin was trying to figure out a decent layout. In this case, I settled on a CSS grid for each letter grouping of locations, getting a panel in it. So you select a location, and that presents a choices of terrain at that location, and then you select the terrain, and then you get a randomly generated result based on those choices. So here are the routes I use in Mojo. You got your basic route. The next one, matches a location in the URL and then adds the terrain, and then the final result that hands it off to the subroutine that processes things and gets the actual work done. And this is the guts of that. So you create a rolling hub, which lets you do the automated rolling. And then it, loads the location file of the result that was given to it. Then you give it the terrain and stuff like that. And unfortunately, for my web app, I haven't implemented the dispatch table I created for my command line app. So I got more to it to work on there. So Northwind Ventures publishes a character sheet for Hyperborea, and it's a form fillable PDF. It has many, many, many pages. Form fillable PDFs are nice, which means you can type in the information you need instead of writing it with a pen or pencil, which makes it legible to the players you give them to, but it's also time consuming either way. And I was wondering if I could somehow automate this process. I learned about form data formats, which is a way to automate the filling of form fillable PDFs, assuming you have a program that understands FDFs. As part of that, I needed to figure out the names of the fields in the PDF. And here I use a program called Master PDF Editor that shows the properties of each field. In this case, it's highlighting the strength attribute and the actual FDF name for that. For this particular PDF, there are over 500 form fields that you could potentially fill out. And so I needed a more automated way to even get the name fields. And in this case, there are a couple of tools I looked at: PDF Toolkit and CanPDF. I use both to figure out which one I like better, and then they do things slightly differently. And coincidentally, I use PDFTK as the program to automatically feed an FDF file in a PDF to create a filled out PDF. And here's an example of some of the 500 field names from that file. So once I had my FDF, I needed to figure out what's the minimum data set I thought I could use to create a usable character sheet. In this case, it was just 8 lines of YAML. But many, many hours of data entry later, because I needed the tables from the game to associate with the forms in the field. In this case, I needed at least 40 tables to get the minimum amount of data I thought was useful, and up to 70 to 100, to flesh really everything out. So data entry was really the biggest part of this project. But once I had those tables entered, I didn't have to type that data in ever again if I didn't want to. And along with some coding, after I got those tables entered, I could just run a program and fill out my data sheet, mostly. Here is page 1 of the autofilled character sheet. It's has most of the useful information. Here's a second page of the character sheet. This is really why I wanted to automate it, because there's a lot of class abilities, which is a lot of text to write, and it's really useful for the players. But in my simple program, did that just fine. And here's a quick dive into the code. I had to use a dispatch table because there's lots of things to do and process, and this was me getting the hang of dispatch tables as well. And here's the dispatch table. There's lots of buckets I need to put the data into and process and look up tables and the data in those tables. And for example, I grab the data from the that 8-line file and parse out things into different fields, pass it to other subroutines to fill out the other data fields. So yeah, lots of YAML. And then here's a small example of the character attributes file. So for a given value, here's are the associated field names and their associated values for that value. Quick snippet of the class info, what the class abilities are, what it could do at that level, any modifiers and in-game information. So kind of at the end of the time, and I can't go to really all the final changes I made, but I did webify it. If you want to, after this talk, go see all of the crazy things I figured would be useful for creating characters and character sheets for them. So what did I learn? Automate the boring, tedious things. It's just part of my job as a sysadmin. I was able finally to code a working dispatch table, and I really got to give back to the gaming community I love. And I was able to fuel my creativity for coding in Perl with the creativity, my hobby, and the game I love to do. Thank you. Here's some URLs of where you can find my programs I wrote for Hyperborea, some of my blogging, my open source ideas for gaming, and where you can find my slides. Thank you. What questions do you have for me?
So if you have a question, either unmute yourself or raise your hand. Both should work.
Looking for my, there it is.
We have 3 minutes for question.
Any questions? I mean, I got like 20 more slides I can give.
Okay.
Or I could just
continue. If I see question, I will interrupt you. And when we will reach the end, I will let you know.
All right, we'll just dive when, pull the hook when it needs to. Here we go. Hold on, I gotta get to the right.
I just want to share, because the thing that taught me to type was typing in like random treasure generator when I was, that's how I learned to type. Because I had to adjust the tables for the game that I preferred and insert new treasures and stuff like that. And so
yep.
it's cool to see.
Yep.
And actually the first programs I wrote were also doing exactly the same thing. That was after I learned to type.
Cool. All right, let's see how fast I can get 20 slides in. Here we go. Bonus content. So I've been going to this gaming convention for some time. They make available the events of the available at the conference, and you can download a CSV file of the conventions. This is all powered by JT Smith's tabletop events. And he does a really good job with this product, badges, event submission, event registration, everything you need to do to run a con. However, the CSV file, I just wish there was more detail and a better way to search the events data. So I went looking. It has an API because JT is great. So will this allow me to grab more detailed event data? And what do I need to do that? Like in a good API, you need to grab a key. So I'll gloss over that. You need to go, how do you go in TTE to get an API key? Bring in the docs, you need to figure out what the convention ID of the convention is. I can do this 1 minute. So I'm going to use for this example the Con of Champions event, mostly to talk about its goal was to do gaming and raise funds to help TTE survive the COVID-19 pandemic, because in-person conventions are like dead for a while. So with some Unix command line stuff, we can find the convention ID from the calls the website makes itself to create and maintain the website. Now on this ID, we can just browse to a web page and see what we can see. Here's a very abbreviated list of the JSON that the API returns. You get a list of events, any custom fields you might need to worry about in the events, and paging info to let you know how many pages of calls you have to make and how many events you should have at the end of all your calling. Here's the basic functions. Start uploads a YAML file with information. Anything else you need to worry about? You get a wing object, so you can hit up the API all you want. And I figured out you had to prime the pump a little bit to get the data before you get the data. So you pass in the con ID to your client, make your request, and then you start paging through all the data available to you. So now we just iterate through all those pages and pages of data, event data, parse the data from each page to get data subroutine till all the pages have been requested. Next, open up a file, dump the data into a CSV file format, and print the file, and you're done. And that's it. Bonus content.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. You did great.